chick flicks, romantic comedies, rom-coms. You love them, you hate them, but we are here to eviscerate them. Welcome to the RomCom Killjoys podcast. I'm your host, Jonelle Walker. Now, let's get on with some feminist joy killing. Hello, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. We're coming to you in a very particular time, not just in a time in the calendar year where we recognize Pride Month here at the beginning of June in recognition of the Stonewall Riot in 1969 and celebrate the whole spectrum of queerness and all of its beauty all through the month of June. But we're also recognizing a time of great mourning and difficulty and complexity in the United States and elsewhere as we recognize ongoing attacks on Black lives and the degree to which those attacks are not being addressed structurally. So in recognition of that, before we get started with our episode, and in very much due deference to all of the intricacies between, around, and through Black life and queerness, and in recognition of both the ongoing uprisings now and the uprisings that bring us Pride Month, we're going to be donating all of our proceeds from Patreon beyond cost to Taraji P. Henson's Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation. This isn't a spot from the foundation. This isn't something they've asked us to do. It's just something that we've looked into as an organization that we think could be useful to people right now and we think has a great mission. The foundation advocates for greater understandings and access to mental health for the Black community. And it is also offering free mental health services right now. So you can go to their website, borislhensonfoundation.org, to get some free therapy during this time that is so difficult and painful and taxing for Black folks, especially in our audience. So we encourage you to check that out, and we recognize this difficult time, and we move with it into this very special episode that kicks off our Pride Month here on the podcast. And kicking us off on that journey is Yaryna Onufrey. Yaryna, will you introduce yourself to the people?
Hi, my name is Yaryna, and Jonelle and I went to college together. And I am a queer woman, and I love romantic comedies. So I'm very excited to talk about one of my favorite queer romantic comedies today.
Yes, and tell us, what is the film that we are starting with today that was a recommendation from you?
Yes, so we are starting with one of my favorite movies. It is Imagine Me and You, and it stars Lena Headey and Piper Perabo. And Piper Perabo plays a woman who realizes she's in love with her florist on her wedding day. So there's quite a lot to unpack there.
Yes, and let's get going with it. I'll start us off by reading the Google summary. Here we go. Imagine Me and You, the year of our Lord 2005. During her wedding ceremony, Rachel, played by Piper Perabo, notices Luce, played by Lena Headey, in the audience and feels instantly drawn to her. The two women become close friends. And when Rachel learns that Luce is a lesbian, she realizes that despite her happy marriage to Heck, played by Matthew Good, she is falling for Luce. As she questions her sexual orientation, Rachel must decide between her stable relationship with Heck and her exhilarating new romance with Luce. Well, Yaryna, that's what Google says this movie is about. But if you had to really articulate it, what is this movie really about?
I would have to say this movie is really about a woman who is stuck in compulsory heterosexuality, truly finding herself. And this is kind of a love letter to women who realize they're queer after they marry or later in life, which is still fairly common, especially because a lot of us still feel the pull of compulsory heterosexuality and, am I truly queer enough? So it's about Rachel finding herself and realizing that she deserves happiness no matter what, but it's also not about her achieving happiness, it's about everyone achieving happiness. Because with the main love story, and I just found this out yesterday as I was rewatching it, it was actually designed to be initially written as a heterosexual couple. So Luce was supposed to be a man, or one of the characters was supposed to be a man, and one of the characters was supposed to be a woman. But they changed it to two women, which I find works a lot better and is still somewhat kind of problematic, but not as problematic as running off with another guy right after you marry a guy, in my personal opinion. And it's about finding happiness and realizing you deserve happiness, because most of the well, the three characters that are involved in the love triangle, they're actually kind of great and kind of sympathetic. And it's everyone else who sucks. So I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. I
Mhm.
think it's good to start actually because I wrote this phrase down in my notes over and over again. Compulsory heterosexuality, heteronormativity. If you were to say what compulsory heterosexuality means to you, what would you say its definition is?
Compulsory heterosexuality to me, from the time I was little, I've always wanted to sort of be perceived as normal. And normalcy to many people is being heterosexual. So with compulsory heterosexuality, it was always, I want to be normal. I want to be normal, knowing deep down inside that, I wasn't normal. And it wasn't until I came out in college where and was able to be in an environment where my abnormalcy was not something shameful or hidden, but something to be celebrated. That really helped me get over wanting to be heteronormative and wanting that compulsory heterosexuality. So that's kind of what compulsory heterosexuality is to me. What about you, Janelle?
I would agree with that. I think,
Mhm.
I my relationship to it as an idea is slightly different because I identify as straight, insofar as I feel like I can identify with any identity marker in terms of sexuality. But yeah, I think it's that deep interconnectedness between the idea of having a different gender partner and this idea of the normal and the supposed to and the role you're supposed to play in society. And
Mhm.
I think this film does a really good job. And I'm so surprised to hear from you that this was initially written for two heterosexual couples and like a heterosexual love triangle, because you're right. I think that the story works so beautifully with this, later in life, burgeoning into queerness, because the movie starts at the wedding, and Rachel, who's Piper Parabo's character, in her like bridal speech, she talks about how she and Heck were mates, right? Friends, and then they were lovers. And even though that's not a conventional fairy tale, maybe it's a good kind of fairy tale. But the subtext there is that, but but is it really that magic? Is it really magic, or is it just what you think you're supposed to be doing?
Yeah, and later on it goes, when she's sort of coming out to him when he's kind of like asleep and drunk on the couch, or pretending to be asleep and drunk on the couch, is, she just says outright, we were best friends before and we can stay best friends. And this is sort of after she realizes, she can't do this with Luce because she's gonna hurt Heck. So yeah, I'd agree with you there. It's like, it's a different kind of magic, but then she sees Luce across the room and starts interacting with her and is like, "Oh, wait a minute, there is something else there." And then it goes into that debate that they're having when the three of them and Hector's best friend Cooper, who I can't remember who plays him, but he is your stereotypical anything that moves kind of person, where you're just sitting here going like, how is Heck, who is, he's a pretty nice guy. And I'm not saying this like he's a nice guy, like he's a genuinely good human being and you're rooting for Heck too. And Coop is just this kind of person where I don't know how he and Heck are friends, but with Rachel and Luce debating over love building gradually versus love at first sight, and
Mm.
Luce believes in love at first sight, and Rachel believing in, love happens gradually. So it all goes back to like, this magic and like what makes your heart like want to burst out of your chest.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that until you put it in those terms, but the movie is sort of putting forward this theory that your kind of sexual identity, or maybe if we want to speak specifically about queerness, maybe there's a way in which you can experience your queerness through that like rigor of heteronormativity and compulsory heterosexuality as this sort of like, whoa, like I'm feeling this magical sensation for the first time that feels like right. Because doesn't Rachel say, her mom asks her, are you really sure? Are you sure you know it's been a short period of time? And what she's asking is about whether she really feels strongly about Luce, but she's also implying, like, do you really know that you're queer? And her response is, like, I knew in the first 3 seconds.
Yeah, so I think with Rachel is she is still like in the in that part of the movie. She's still in the very early stages of she saw Luce and she doesn't know how to feel about this person and she's like actively trying to hook her up with Cooper, possibly to sort of tamp down her own feelings for Luce. And I think with that sort of thing, it's Rachel's very obviously being like, this is an attack on my heterosexuality, which I've always been straight and I've never, realized this attraction to women. With the growing into it versus love at first sight, it's kind of the paradox of I've been queer, I've always known I was queer, and this is not a problem versus the I have just now realized I'm queer and I've, been raised in a household where it was, either deviant or just not openly accepted. And it's kind of that dichotomy of, you always know or you just tamped it down so deep inside that you just forgot to think about it or did not want to think about it. And I know I'm not going to go too deep into my personal experience, but it was sort of, again, with the desire for normalcy is just something I tamped down so deep inside where it was like whenever it was, are you not straight? It's like, no, what do you mean? Like this is, this I'm not, any different than you. Really push hard on the it's something you always know. And, with some people it is something they always know and with some people it's the opposite. It's something that comes on gradually.
You know, one part of this film that I found interesting in terms of what I know about the history of queer literature and how queer women are represented in literature, and which is not as much as I would like, to be perfectly honest. But I was really interested in how this movie uses the language of flowers and that Luce is a florist. Um, and I was wondering how all of the kind of flower imagery and like the Victorian language of love with flowers, like how was that all settling with you in this movie? What'd you think of it?
I mean, one, it's kind of it's a little bit hitting the nail on the head because Luce is a florist. This movie was written in this movie was filmed in 2005, and
Mhm.
for even that time period, it was, with the secret language of flowers, queerness just was not as fully accepted. I mean, Lou says, the laws are changing to be more queer friendly, but we all know, like, even back in like the mid 2000s, when like actors were being outed left, right, and center, and it was kind of that sort of start to change. So,
One of the things I was thinking about specifically was like two things. So, one thing I know is that, especially in England, like wearing, at least for, I think it was queer men actually who had this experience, but you would wear like a carnation in your lapel if you were
mhm.
queer to communicate to other people that you were queer. And I know like lavender has held this like really important symbolic value to queer women, at least in the West.
Yeah,
Um,
lavender and violets.
yes, lavender and violets. So I guess like I was thinking so much about how this movie could possibly have been about heterosexuals when that is so much a part of the plot, and it feels like so literarily perfect. And like the
I
whole thing with
know.
the lily, like I dare you to love me. Oh, oh.
Yeah, it's just com- like with the I dare you to love me, it's, it's her favorite, and it's even more perfect that it's Rachel's favorite flower with daring, she needs to be more daring, she needs to be more bold because she has been daring and bold, but not quite as daring and as bold as she could be, which kind of loose helps her to be throughout the entire movie with, the you're a wanker number 9 scene. And then with the scene where she's daydreaming about almost kissing Luce at her sister's school presentation, which I can't wait to get into that because I have so many thoughts on Rachel's family. And that's just very completely perfect. I think I would have been like more excited if it had been flat, like sort of a violet or a lavender type of thing, but because I unfortunately see lilies as a funeral flower.
I thought the
But
same thing. I was like, I
yeah,
didn't know that they were associated with love that way, but okay.
it's like, okay, well, it could be like, I dare you to love me, but also with the funeral flower type thing, it's kind of like the death of Rachel and Heck's relationship, which is like sad, but it also works. So that's kind of what my thoughts are on it.
Contradictory symbolism.
I know. So
But wait,
complex.
let's get into your thoughts about her family. I mean, so
Oh my God.
what do you think about Rachel's family and their, I presume, their reactions both to her, coming out and also maybe even her marriage to Heck, which I have questions about.
Yeah, no, with Rachel's family, I'm just like, how this romantic comedy is, how can the three main characters be so well written and the three supporting characters be so poorly written? Because it's, Coop is terrible. Rachel's mother, I'm like watching her for majority of the movie going, why are you married to your husband and why do you have children with him? Because you clearly don't like your family. And it's so sad where you feel bad for Rachel's father, who's played by Anthony Head, who unfortunately does not Buffy speak in this movie, and I truly wish he would. Um, little hammering on the head, but whatever. With Rachel's dad in the first scene, they're driving to the church, and her father goes, "We've been married for nearly 30 years. If I killed her when I first thought about it, I would be out of prison by now." And it's like your daughter's getting married. Why would you say that as you're going to the church?
And yet, like, when there's the scene right before Rachel comes out to her family, it's her birthday, and the gift her mother
Yeah,
gives her for her birthday is a book called How to Be a Domestic Goddess, which I
I
laughed out
know.
loud because I think, to your point, like, the parents are almost too obviously like telling us like heteronormativity is a trap,
I
straight
know.
marriage is for losers. Like,
Like the only good heterosexual relationship in this movie is Rachel's little sister H, which for those of you who have not seen the movie, introduces herself as H because it's not short for Henrietta, it's short for Jesus H. Christ because her mother said those words when she found out she was pregnant. And for context, Rachel is in like her mid to late 20s and H is like 9, 10, maybe 11 years old if you really want to stretch it.
mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's like, her mother gives a book, says how to be a domestic goddess, constantly nags about grandchildren, has this incredible line where Rachel is telling her parents she's in love with someone else, and probably one of the most iconic lines in LGBT cinema when her mother's starting to realize Luce is a woman, says, "So the two of you are lesbi friends," which I still personally quote to this day. So it's just, they're just constantly but going back to my original point, H during the movie, during the Guy Fawkes Day celebrations, meets a boy, and it's kind of love at first sight for the two of them, and he becomes her boyfriend. So the fact that a relationship between like two 10-year-olds is the least problematic heterosexual relationship in this movie, it really says something about like, homosexuality good, heterosexuality bad, and it's not exactly great.
Yeah, especially because I think right before that, or maybe right around it, H asks, or is talking to Luce about, like, oh, why don't you have a boyfriend? Blah, blah, blah. And Luce is trying to tell her, like, oh, well, like, I'm a lesbian. Not in so many words, but trying to say that. And then H says, oh, yeah, well, I'd love to spend my whole life with my best girlfriend, but it's not because we're lesbians or anything. Which
Yeah.
it's sort of like you sort of wonder, well, we'll see what happens for young H. Perhaps, she'll find happiness
Yeah.
elsewhere as well.
It's been 15
Perhaps.
years. I think we're due for a sequel at this point.
Yes. H takes London.
H takes London. H discovers Each gets all the answers to all the questions she's been asking and discovers who she truly is.
Wait, speaking of getting all the answers to all of your questions vis-a-vis sexuality, can we talk about the fact that Rachel rented lesbian porn from a video store?
Oh my God. And this movie was written in like 2004, 2005 because the porno was Georgie's Bush.
Yeah.
And, on top of, trying to figure out your sexuality via porn, which who hasn't tried to do that, let's be fair.
Sure.
Renting it from a video store while running into her mother, one, it's a throwback, but two, like, doesn't she know how to use a computer at home unless they don't have one, which, to be fair, some places people just still didn't have home computers in 2005, but just do what we all did when we were teenagers and like wait until your parents are out of the house and sneak downstairs and look up stuff and then frantically delete the browser history because the last thing you want is questions about like why are you watching this.
A sentiment that we can all share in differing shades depending on our search terms, I guess, right? Yes, I found that scene so hilarious for all of those reasons, and I just wrote in my notes in all caps, "Hello, I'll have your finest lesbian porn, please and thank you." Because I guess like I'm so used to the puritanical world of the United States that I was like laughing at the implausibility of there being like open porn in like a regular video store, like not covered up or anything. And then I was like, wait a minute, we're in the UK. I guess that's okay. But then I don't know if that's true either. Anyway,
I've never
believability
been
issues.
No, I've never been to a video store in the UK, and I likely never will. And like the fact that they didn't have to go into the secret back area to access all of those dirty, dirty pornos. But I was written by a UK director and written by a UK writer and directed by a UK director, so I'm gonna trust them on that.
Yeah. I believe in the plausibility of this moment.
Yes.
um, so I think what I want to dive into now, because we've praised this film in some shades and for the most part, but I want to
Hmm.
get into some of the things that I think we could take this film to task for 15 years later, acknowledging that the fact that it was a mainstream kind of queer rom-com in its time was a really big deal.
Hmm.
So let's dive in, shall we?
Yes. Yes.
I think one of the big ones that I had, and I'm curious what you think about this, is I realized at a certain point, and you've kind of already hit on it, that there are moments where loose borders on being sort of like a manic pixie dream girl for Rachel. Now, she's so well written that she is at least her own woman, and we are invested in her journey apart from Rachel. But there was this moment, for example, where Rachel found her standing in the rain, and I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh no.
Yeah, I mean, if Rachel had been a man, I would 100% having traumatic flashbacks to 500 Days of Summer and being like, oh God, honey, Luce, stop. No, why are you doing this? It's not your job to take her on this journey or rather him, rather, if Rachel had been a man, on this journey of finding himself and discovering who he truly is. But, I think for a lot of us, we all kind of have, for a lot of us queer women, we all kind of have that one girl who like was the key to our personal closet and was like,
Mm.
oh, 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 oh. It's not necessarily that she's really a manic pixie dream girl. It's just like you meet her and then you just suddenly like realize like, oh wait, this is a whole other possibility. Why did I never think of this before? But you are right. It's just the scene in the rain, or whenever they're going back, or whenever she's teaching her how to project her voice,
Mm-hmm.
which it's, kind of adorable because Rachel's like, show me where my diaphragm is. I can't feel it. And Luce kind of just,
I just love it's like I love that like show me where my diaphragm is because they make earlier references to the diaphragm like the sexual like prophylactic. So I
yeah,
didn't realize until you said it just then that it's kind of also like a double entendre. But anyway, continue. Sorry, I interrupted.
real, no, it's fine. I totally like y- sudden realizations is the name of the game in this day and age, I feel. So just when she wraps her arms around Luce, and if or when Luce wraps her arms around Rachel, excuse me. On the one hand, it's just like you're rooting for this couple, and it's a completely adorable scene. But on the other hand, if it was like a girl and a guy, it would be like, oh no, baby, what are you doing? Like, don't encourage this. But it's kind of hard because I am biased because I do unironically love this movie, adore this movie, love this movie. I will always recommend this movie. So yeah, looking back on it now, it's just, she is the closet key, and sometimes a lot of the time the relationship with the closet key doesn't work out. Sometimes it does. I hope for Rachel and Luce it worked
Mm.
out, but she is very manic pixie dream girly.
Is the closet key an established trope?
There is a page on TV tropes about closet keys. I know for myself, there are a couple of actresses out there, not a real person necessarily, but a couple of actresses out there where I saw them and I was like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, I think I do want to make out with you. I think I am attracted to you. So yeah, closet keys are very much an established trope, especially in queer cinema. Carol in 2005, Carol is Teresa's closet key. Children's Hour back in the 1960s. It's not necessarily a direct closet key, but Shirley MacLaine's character has been in love with Audrey Hepburn's character the whole time. And being in love with Audrey Hepburn's character the whole time is what, she realizes through Audrey Hepburn's character, I am a lesbian. Now, Children's Hour ends very tragically, while Carol ends in a completely different manner. So yeah, so it's a pretty established trope.
I love this because I did not know that, so I'm really excited by this idea. It makes me wonder if, in these narratives, do you think is there something important about there being a closet key in these representations of queer women, especially in like the romance, right? Like when we're seeing a couple fall for each other. What does it look like? Because I'm having a hard time thinking of an example of this, but I'm sure it's out there where you have a representation of queer women who know that they're queer, and that's not the story of the romance, that's not the conflict of the romance. Can you think of examples?
I mean, I think the one that's coming to the top of my head is the half of it, which Ramya recommended on the podcast a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, yeah.
And with that, I'm pretty sure the main character already knows she's queer. And she already has a crush on the girl who she's trying to help the jock hook up with. And then with the other one I can think of is the comedy But I'm a Cheerleader with Natasha Lyonne, and she plays a cheerleader in high school who everyone is convinced is gay, and she actually realizes that she is gay. So her parents send her to a conversion therapy camp, except it's a parody of a conversion therapy camp. And she winds up falling in love with another one of the campers, but both of them already know they're gay and they don't want to change. So that's sort of some of the other films I can think of with, there's no closet key. It's they know they're queer, and either they accept themselves as queer or already have accepted themselves as queer, and they're just in love with another person.
Thanks for those examples. I love But I'm a Cheerleader, so I'm really glad that we had a hat tip to that in this episode. Thank you for that.
Yes.
This topic of the closet key and this question of like a queer female couple where they both know that they're queer, etc., versus the sort of like lesbian educator closet key. Makes me think about one thing that I found interesting that the film did that could have been disastrous, but they somehow seem to have avoided making it completely disastrous, which was the relationship between Luce and Cooper.
Hmm.
What did you think about that? Their relationship
I mean,
being what it was.
with Luce and Cooper, again, Cooper kind of sucks, but he's also a good friend to Heck, and eventually ends up being a decent friend to Luce. And, it could have been a complete disaster. I appreciate they had the moment in there where Coop realizes, I can't actually change who she is when he's talking to Hector. Of course, he doesn't actually stand by that because he then asks her out on dates and it only takes her sitting him down and saying, "Look, I will be your friend, but I'm never going to date you." He continues to have kind of this slightly shitty attitude, but he also is there and he's there to call out Luce for kind of being crappy to Hector because with Hector, he's almost an innocent bystander in all of this, and he doesn't deserve, his wife falling in love with another woman, even though she can't help falling in love with another woman. It's just who she is and who that she hasn't realized it yet. So I'm glad that Coop is there to call her out for, not being great to Hector and sort of having his wife kind of fall in love with her unexpectedly. So that's kind of complicated. It's one of the few things about the movie where I'm just like, you don't explore nearly enough of this potential relationship to have as much of an appreciation as you could have about it.
Yeah, I totally agree because, I think that all of the parts where Coop is, consistently pursuing Luz are very 2005. I think if you tried to put that in a movie now, people would um, be upset about it because they should. It's ridiculous and it's backward.
Hmm.
Even joking about it is backward. But I do think that there is indeed something really interesting about Luce and Coop having a relationship the way that they do, where they push each other because they're both places sort of outside this like compulsory heterosexual world that Hector and Rachel find themselves in, which is interesting in and of itself. However, there is, again, like you say, something kind of problematic and complex about Coop being this rake, this like over sexualized ne'er do well, essentially, being paired up with Luce, the queer woman, because queer women, especially what, like you were saying, called the closet key, early on, as far as I understand it, representations of queer women in like the late 19th century, the early 20th century, they were broken into two types. They were the femme, as we might call it now, which is like so the pursued woman, and then the invert, the sort of butch, the more masculine woman.
Kind of, if sorry for interrupting, but also like kind of the trope of like the predatory lesbian, where it's just like, I will turn you gay, and that really flies into that as well.
Exactly. I was definitely concerned about her and Coop being aligned that way for that reason. But they do manage to avoid that because there's nothing about Luce that is predatory or aggressive or at all. Not or even like really sexualized in the way that Coop is.
Hmm. And it's interesting you brought up they're outside the world of this heterosexuality that Heck and Rachel are in because, Coop has a conversation with Heck saying he's getting older and he kind of wishes that he had what Heck and Rachel have. And at the very end in the credits, he's holding a baby, which,
Mm-hmm.
I was always, how the hell does Coop have a baby until I was thinking back and I was like, oh, wait a minute, that woman who was crying in the flower shop in Luce's arms because she's pregnant, that must be Coop's baby mama right there. That must
Damn it,
be,
Coop.
yeah, like, damn it, Coop. But, he kind of does wind up in that heteronormativity pile where he's settled down and he has a baby who he very, very clearly loves.
That's true. And then under that, it's so funny because that scene that you're talking about where he's talking to Heck and he says, like, I want what you and Rachel have. It just seems so happy. It seems so stable. And you can see sort of like the gears turning behind Heck's eyes as he's thinking, like, but it's not happy and it's not stable, and there's clearly something very wrong here. So it's kind of like the film, like you said, sort of leaves you thinking about like, well, but then is that thing that Heck is or the thing that Coop is pursuing really what he thinks it is?
Like, are you looking at it through rose tinted glasses, and because it's something you want but you don't feel like you can have or deserve to have. So it's, again, I just kind of want a sequel to this movie to see where everyone ended up, because it's, did Rachel and Luce stay together? Did Heck and Angel Colby's character hook up, like, with the love at first sight kind of thing?
Yes.
Is Coop heteronormative with his wife and his child, with his partner and his child? It leaves you wanting more.
Yes, come on, screenwriters out there, write Heck or write H takes London. We
Yes,
want it. Make it
we
happen.
want H takes London.
As our final topic, there is a bit of very beautiful language in this movie that frames it that I wanted to talk to you about before we move on.
Hmm.
and that is the idea of the unstoppable force and the immovable object.
Yes,
What do
yes.
you think about that main metaphor that centers this movie?
I mean, it is a trick question, as Luce tells H at the beginning of the movie. And because there isn't because there's an unstoppable force can't meet an immovable object, something's got to move. And at the end, when Heck is realizing he can't stay with Rachel because she clearly loves another person, he says, it's the unstoppable force, which means I've got to move. And I think it's a pretty appropriate in a way, because once you're on the path to realizing you're not heterosexual, or um, you're not cisgender, you can't really stop that from still progressing. It's always going to be, even if you tamp it down, it's always going to be something in the back of your mind. It's always going to be something that is, the monster under the bed that, you don't want to look at it. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to face it. And you're going to have to say, I am the unstoppable force. My compulsory heterosexuality is the immovable object. And I've got to get this compulsory heterosexuality out of the way so I can be who I really am. And that's sort of my interpretation of it.
I think that's perfect. I think that we could not end on a better note for this conversation. So, before we talk about our lovely recommendations to expand your horizons from this really quite delightful wisp of a movie, which is short and sweet and lovely in so many ways, I just want to give a quick shout out to our patrons from Patreon who, due to your generosity this week, not only are we going to be able to keep the podcast running, but we're also going to be able to make a donation to Taraji P. Henson's foundation, as I said, this month. So, big shout out to,
Yay!
yay! To Esther, Bob, Emily, Robert, Sean, and Tim for everything you do for us and all that you are going to contribute to via us to the Henson Foundation. So thank you. All right, Yaryna, now is the time in the show where we offer our antidotes. And in this case, it's not really an antidote. Let's think of it as like a digestif post film to keep things moving. What is your recommendation for Imagine Me and You?
So my recommendation is Love, Simon. And going to the teen years, it's about a teenage boy named Simon who is in a family that loves each other very much, and the parents don't hate each other, which is kind of like the main antidote to Imagine Me and You of of Rachel's parents hating each other. But he has not told anyone that he's gay, and he sort of has this romance over the internet with another gay student at the school. And it's sort of about finding the courage to come out not only to yourself, but to your loved ones and be loved for who you truly are. So, my recommendation is Love, Simon.
My recommendation for Imagine Me and You is a classic novel. Many of you may have read it, but if you haven't, then you really should. And it is called Orlando by the great Virginia Woolf. And I recommend it not necessarily because it is a similar story of love between two queer women, but it is the product of a great love between two queer women, and those were Virginia Woolf and her lover Vita Sackville West. This book is a sort of modernist experimental novel about a young person in the Renaissance England named Orlando who lives through their youth as a man and then finds themselves transitioning to womanhood and then living another 300 years into modernity. It's a wonderful novel. It's full of love and magic, queer gender, and all kinds of explorations that are a beautiful tribute to a wonderful relationship between two brilliant women. And I think there's nothing better than that to follow up this movie. Well, Yaryna, thank you so much for being on this inaugural Pride episode of RomCom Killjoys. I really appreciate you suggesting this movie and for talking to me.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. And if you have any more queer rom-coms that you want me to analyze, or even straight rom-coms you want me to analyze from a queer point of view, please feel free to text me or ask me to come on again. This was a lot of fun.
Baby love, my baby love. Thank you for listening to the RomCom Killjoys podcast. If you liked this episode, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at RomCom Killjoys. And if you'd like to support us further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/romcomkilljoys to gain access to exclusive bonus content. Our theme song is Lady Slut Hitchhike Love by the band A Giant Dog. And the song you're listening to now is a cover of one of my favorites, Baby Love, by Colin Langanis. Remember, Killjoys, don't let anyone kill your joy. Not a rom-com, not me, not anyone. See you next time.